begin today, a few days, I believe, we'll hear from the book of Ecclesiastes, and then after Ecclesiastes, we'll be in the book of Job. So they're called the wisdom literature, the wisdom books. Ecclesiastes, Job, Sirach, Proverbs. So be on the lookout of that. I want to focus on not that, but the gospel today. But that's just where we'll be in our first readings here in these days ahead. What we hear in the gospel is from a perplexed and curious Herod. And we see at the end of this, as we see his curiosity, him being perplexed. And we see that last line says, he kept trying to see him. He kept trying to see this one that he's perplexed about. He keeps trying to see this one that he's curious about. But he keeps trying to see him, and he doesn't see him. And at the end, he doesn't see him. He doesn't come to know him. And I want to. There's a hiddenness to God. There's a hiddenness to Jesus. There's an author puts it. Boniface Hicks says. He says, God is hidden in order to draw us into his hiddenness with him, to draw us to let go of all that keeps us from knowing in his hiddenness that he is nearer to us than we are to ourselves. So the hiddenness of God is it's a point of, like, at first pass, it can be a frustration to the hiddenness of God. But God wants to draw us into his hiddenness, right? And like to get lost in God, to get lost in his hiddenness, so as to receive from him, to enter this deeper spot of transforming union, of receiving him, receiving his love. Herod was not able to get there. He wasn't able to enter into the hiddenness of God, and his perplexity, his curiosity is not enough. Ultimately, like two big roadblocks for him was, one, he didn't have the supernatural faith that's needed. The spiritual life, as beautiful it is, there's a pain to it, because we're in love with a hidden God. Like we want to be we're in a love affair with a hidden God. He's more real than we are. He's more real than the person sitting next to you or behind you in the pew. But there's a hiddenness to him. And he invites us into that hiddenness. The supernatural faith is needed. And the other aspect there is Herod is like the prototype of the anti-divine. Pursuing worldly pleasures, getting drunk, sex. The anti-divine. Pope Benedict says this. He says, as it relates to the hiddenness of God, he says, we can see him only by becoming like him, by reaching the level of reality on which God exists. The supernatural, the spiritual. In other words, by being liberated from what is anti-divine. The quest for pleasure, enjoyment, possessions, gain, or in a word, from ourselves. In the final analysis, it is usually the self that stands between us and God. It's usually us that prevents us from being lost in the hiddenness of God and receiving his love and him drawing us into that spot. That's not to say we're lost in hiddenness, that all of our responsibilities and everything is, our kids and our jobs and our wife. No. But maybe just for us today, with regards to the hiddenness of God, what's anti-divine in our lives? We've got tons of things. And increasingly so, the more emphasis that our culture puts on material things, and it's easier to get lost in material things. What are the things that keep us, like Herod, on those two things maybe, the faith and the anti-divine things? And I also just think of, this morning of it's both really a combination of St. Francis of Assisi and St. Ignatius that kind of like help us with those two things with regards to prayer and the fact that we're always drawn into, and the end, like the goal, the place of peace is to enter in this love affair with a hidden God. Three things, practical things that they say, like just when you enter into prayer, is remember that God is universally present. Remember that he's present to my mind and heart right now. And then recall the fact that he's sitting next to me. That God is not just this force or spirit, he's concrete. As real as the person that's sitting behind me or next to me in the pew, he's sitting beside me. So God is universally present. He's present to my mind and heart right now. And he's sitting next to me. St. Francis of Assisi and St. Ignatius, practical tip there to help us not to be just that perplexed and curious Herod.